Um, my name's Ron, as you can see. I'm a volunteer with Bumblebee Conservation Trust, but I've also developed a very, very deep interest in solitary bees, especially the solitary bees that you find in your garden, if you've got your garden planted up properly for them, or planted up well is a better way of putting it. I work as a school caretaker, but I spend a lot of my time now at the school as well, trying to get the kids focused in on the small creatures, because young kids at a primary school, they're like sponges. Next week we've got our sort of welfare week, so we've got loads and loads. We're planting trees, we're putting flowers in flower beds, and we're building bug houses. So I've got quite a week ahead. That's it really about me. I'm just a bee nut, you could say. I spend that much time with my mason bees every year that my wife Jane calls them Ron's little people. And I'm just I just love the things, to be quite honest. The garden's alive when there's some bees in it. Right, we'll get off. I was at the Mining Bees webinar, thoroughly enjoyed it. We've got quite a few nice little special places in Staffordshire, but one that really, really stands out head and shoulders above the rest for solitary bees and bumblebees is this one. I've called this little bit Two Staffordshire Gems. This is called Highgate Common. It's probably, well, it is one, yeah, I will say it is the best site in Staffordshire for solitary bees, especially. And one of the bees, I don't know if you get them that far up north in the northwest. I hope that doesn't sound bad, me putting it that way. But one of the bees we do find in this, as you can see, it's brilliant habitat for solitary bees. There's these sandy banks, there's dips in the ground, there's footpath edges, and everywhere you look, there's solitary bees. It is really, really, really good. And one of my favourite bees down there, we do get Andrina nigrospina down there, the large black mining bee, but the one I really like to find down there is this little character, the pantaloon bee. We staggered across these about 2 years ago, quite transfixed by them. As you can see, they're really, really gorgeous bees, and named because of the huge pollen collecting scopa on the tibia of the hind leg. You have to be there quite early to see these characters, because a lot of the flowers, the composites that they feed upon, they close up early in the afternoon. So what these little bees do, they go back inside, and myself and a good bee friend actually watch these little characters hide in the entrance to the holes. This was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's Highgate Common. If you want to pay a visit, come down south into Staffordshire, then Staffordshire Wildlife Trust website, you've got the postcode, map references and everything else, and a little bit more info about the site, but it is really, really good. It's well worth a visit if you like your solitary bees. So going on to what tonight is really about, the cavity nesting solitary bees and bee hotels. I'll show you how I look after my solitary bees. I'm expecting not flack, but a little bit of healthy discussion, shall we say. Some people don't like what I do, or what people like me do, but I'll tell you why I do it as we go through the presentation. So obviously that's a little red mason bee, gorgeous little chap too. As most people, I hope I'm not telling hens how to lay eggs, but most bees collect pollen, or bumblebees and honeybees anyway, collect pollen in a pollen basket on the hind leg, on the tibia. That goes for bumblebees and honeybees, as I say. The mining bees collect their pollen on a brush on their legs called the scopa, but the cavity nesting bees collect pollen on the underside of their abdomen. It's also called a scoper. Every photograph in this presentation, by the way, apart from the ones I've showed you of Highgate Common, were actually taken in my back garden, I believe, apart from this one. It's my favourite bee photograph of all time. I'll do a bit of a plug now for Bridget Strawbridge. She's written a wonderful book called Dancing with Bees. I think all the hardback copies are gone. It was published back in 2018, and you can still get it from NHBS in paperback. It's a really nice read about bees. But there's a Leafcutterby that was taken in my front garden. I've got 2 big tubs of this knapweed and things like crane's bills, which brings in a lot of bees in the summer. And as you can see, they've got this quite nice habit, if you're a bee photographer, of sticking their bottoms up in the air, and that shows a bee scoper, a cavity nesting bee scoper in quite nice detail. Another one that you could call a cavity bee is this one, cavity nesting bee that is. It's called the wool-carder bee, or Antidium manicutum. I'm always delighted to find these in the garden. The thing to plant for these little characters, anything in the Stachys family, especially lamb's ear, because the females, this one is a male, you can see the little hooks at the end of his abdomen. There's the female, more rounded abdomen. And she actually cards the wool of lamb's ear plants, of the leaves, rolls it up into a little ball, carries it off in her jaws, and wherever she nests, she teases that out to make her nesting cells. Really, really gorgeous bees. And as you can see, they are tremendous looking little bees. Quite easy to recognise. They've got the yellow spots down the sides of the abdomen, and as Ernie Wise would say, or Eric Morecambe would say, sorry, short, fat, hairy legs, but really, really nice bees to see, as I'm sure you agree. That plant is called betony. It's one of the Stachys families. They love nectaring and collecting pollen from things like that. Right, the red mason bee, Osmia bicornis. They're not rare, but there again, they said that about the tiger back in 1900 when there was 350,000 of them roaming India. So I try and look after my red mason bees, but more about that later. So around April time, a little bit late this year, cold weather. We've had a terrible April. I think there was a frost recorded every day of the year somewhere in England. At least 20 days in Staffordshire, we had a frost to start the morning. The males emerged first, and what I thought was just general boys being boys, having a bit of a riot. It is actually quite a choreographed event, which it sort of forms a dominance hierarchy within the bees. The ones that come out on top get to mate with the most female red mason bees. They're out 10 to 14 days before the females start to emerge, and they sort of set up their hierarchy while the females are still in their cocoons. The female red mason bee, quite easy bee to recognise. She's got a very, very black face. The male, as you saw, had the white little moustache, as I call it, clip ears. Just very, very gingery. They were, until quite recently, known as Osmia rufa. I preferred that Latin name to the one they've got now, Osmia bicornis, which basically means twin-horned. And if you look closely at the front of the bee's head, you can see the 2 little horns that give her a Latin name. And they probably show up quite a lot better on that picture there. Highly dangerous creatures. That's why I always have them sitting on my finger. I've been working with these bees now for about 15 years, and I have never, ever been stung by a red mason bee. I don't know anyone that has, actually. I recommend them to a lot of my friends. It's one of the reasons I do what I do. I make these bee nesters, as I call them. I don't like calling them bee hotels. And we've got one up at the school. There's quite a lot of my friends got them, and children. It gives them a nice, gentle introduction to bees. Nothing nasty is going to happen to the kids when these bees are around. So once the females have emerged, they mate. That happens very, very quickly after the females have left their cocoons. And they don't really care where they mate either. As you can see, there we are. Yeah, as I say, bees on my finger. Enough of that. Very, very occasionally as well, you get quite a giant male, and these little males, they look upon that as a female. And yeah, we'll go no further on that one either. It's just something that happens. I've only ever seen it once, but as you can see, they're both male red mason bees with the white moustaches, and I'm sure nothing came of that liaison. So once they've mated, these bees, then the females anyway, the males just loiter around for a while. They die before the females have finished their nesting. They go away, they collect mud, and they take the mud into wherever they're nesting. In the case in my garden, it's either in cardboard or bamboo tubes, and they put a layer of mud at the far end of the tube. They then collect pollen and a little bit of nectar. You can see that bee's scoper with pollen on it as she enters her chosen tube. And they take the pollen in. They go in head first. You know exactly what they're doing by just observing the bee. It will go in head first with mud in its mandibles, and then it will reverse out. If it's a pollen gathering trip, they'll go a little way into the tube head first, and then they sort of reverse back out, very adroit turn at the end of the tube, and they go in backwards. Then they form this little pile of pollen and nectar. They lay an egg in it, and they put a mud wall. So basically their life is collect mud, collect pollen, nectar, lay an egg, collect mud, and they build a linear row of cells from one end of the tube to the other. They're known as polyelectric bees, which means that they forage from a wide range of plants. And one of my ham-fisted attempts at pollen microscopy shows that quite well. You always find a spillage of pollen underneath a red mason bee nester, and I just brush it up, soak it with isopropyl alcohol, put it onto a slide when most of the isopropyl has evaporated, and then glycerin jelly, and put the slide cover on. So there's quite a lot of different types of pollen there. I haven't got round to identifying them yet, but I know for a fact that one of them is forget-me-not, and it just proves that they are indeed a polyelectric bee which collect pollen from all different flower families. So as they get towards the end of these tubes with all their little compartments with eggs and pollen and nectar in, what I haven't told you, the actual exit end of the tube, they lay unfertilized eggs. The males are at the more towards the entry end, so they emerge first, and then they put a wall of mud. And I just stood and watched the bees were bringing mud in. When she left, there was just that little hole. A few minutes later, she was back, and job done. So as I say, there was a whole line of cells within that tube, mud, a thick wall. They leave the end cell, the vestibular cell is left empty. I can show you that in a moment. And then a really thick wall of mud at the end. So there's just a picture that wasn't done in a tube. That was at the back of one of the drawers in one of my release chambers. I'll show you one of those shortly as well. And as you can see, there's piles of nectar and pollen. It's mainly pollen. Pollen is the growth agent, being protein. These grubs don't need a lot of nectar within there. They're not moving around a lot. Those eggs hatch within about a week. And the grubs then basically chew their way through the what their mum has left them, they grow. And around the end of September, middle of September to October, be a bit later this year because they're out late, these grubs actually spin a cocoon, and within that cocoon they metamorphosize into an adult bee. And if you look at the right hand end of that picture, you can see that one cell left empty. The cocoon is quite a silky layer inside, and it's unbelievably tough layer on the outside, totally waterproof. And what the bees have to do is secrete, when they're ready to come out, they secrete this saliva sort of, saliva, and that actually breaks down the cocoon and makes it easier for them to get out. The shape of the walls, they're not just straight, and what they say is that the bee or the grub, when it aligns itself to spin its cocoon, actually feels the convex edge of the wall that their mum built, and it will lie that way, and it will form that way as an adult bee within its cocoon, so it can actually get out. If it forms the wrong way round, then it's trapped. All very clever stuff. And there's just a close-up of a cocoon within a mud cell. And occasionally, if you've got bee nesters or bee hotels, whichever you want to call them, then you get this happen. Now, I open all the tubes up, as I'll show you later. Now, if I just assumed that one there was a leafcutterby cocoon, all those red mason bees would have been trapped. You can see there's 4 leafcutterby capsules, as I call them, and then there's the gap, there's the vestibular cell. That red mason bee female, she must have laid her last egg and just put the wall in, and then the leafcutter bees moved in later in the year. So that doesn't happen very often, but it's not the first time I've seen it. These bees, as well as nesting in bee hotels, nest in all manner of places. That's Newquay in West Wales. They were actually nesting within the casting holes of a fence of a car park. I'm sure there's a lot of people that went past me that day thinking he's been in the pub, which is just over the way, because I was lying on my back taking pictures of these red mason bees going into the top of the garden fence. Yeah, I'm sure they thought I was drunk and had fallen over, but it was very interesting. That was taken about 4 years ago, and apart from not being able to get back last year due to Mr. COVID, I'm going back in a couple of weeks. I'm hoping to see the bees back using the same nest site. Brick walls is one of the favourites as well. This is the Wildlife Trust, Staffordshire Wildlife Trust headquarters at Wolseley. The building, it used to be the sort of farrier's quarters of Wolseley Hall. So there was a lot of nails hammered into the wall, and they went through the mortar into the cavity, and the bees have exploited that. There's one here that's nested in a redundant door lock. I've heard of them nesting in tumble dry events. Obviously, they use old beetle borings in dead wood in nature, and old plant stems, but they're very, very, how shall I put it, very, very opportunistic bees. They'll nest anywhere, anywhere that is suitable. A lot of people just drill holes in fence posts and stuff like that, but to me, if you're going to drill a lot of holes, you're going to get a lot of bees nesting there, and for reasons I'll tell you later, that isn't brilliant. The other osmia bees, anyway, that use these bee hotels, bee nesters, call them whatever you wish, are these ones, orange vented mason bees. That's the female. As her name suggests, she's got an orange underside, an orange scoper. And there's one of the little males. They're really, really gorgeous little bees. I'm always glad to see them around the garden as well. Then there's the blue mason bee. Quite a large-headed bee is the blue mason bee. And there's a little blue mason bee male. Right. If you just look below the Leafcutterby, which is just finishing her nest off there, you'll see something that looks like pesto at the end of that tube. That's because orange-vented and blue mason bees, they don't use mud, they don't use whole leaves. They sort of chew up leaves and make them into a mastic and make their cells that way. The leafcutter bees, they come out later in the year. Usually where I live, they start appearing in June. And if you ever get the opportunity to watch them actually cutting the leaves for their nests, it is quite an experience. If you put your ear close to them, it sounds like scissors going through Irish linen. It's just a snip, 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 snip noise. It takes seconds. It's unbelievable to watch. And there's the, and just before the leaf gives way, the wings start beating, and then off she goes, carrying a piece of leaf. A little bit like a torpedo jaw. She uses her jaws, and she also uses her legs to carry the pieces of leaf. To actually make the sides of the cells, they cut almost oblong shaped pieces, and the plugs that they put in the end, perfect circles. I don't know quite how they do it, but they can just go in, and these circles are cut perfectly to size for whichever tube that they decide to use. Occasionally they'll use petals. I was a bit annoyed there. I like my crane's bills, and this one decided to make an end of one of the tubes out of crane's bill petals for some reason. And there we go. It's just so nice to be able to watch these bees at work. Again, like red mason bees, they'll nest in all manner of strange places. There's 3 or 4 different species of leafcutter that you'll find in gardens. This one obviously nesting in a hose pipe, and she was really had to struggle to actually get into that hose pipe because the surface was quite slippy, and she dropped as many leaves as she managed to get in, but she stayed at it, and they hatched out the following year. It was really good to watch that bee. They hatch out, again, males before the females. And if you've got a good colony of leafcutter bees, then I don't do anything with leafcutter bee cocoons at the moment. They don't seem to be parasitized by anything like the amount of parasites that red mason bees get. And you can actually hear them inside these tubes chewing away as they emerge. Little face pops out, and off they go. Again, there's some quite distinctive ones. This is one called Willoughby's Leafcutter bee, big feathery front legs, and yeah, as I say, there's about 4 different species that will use a garden: the woodcutted leafcutter bee, the patchwork leafcutter bee. Yeah, they're really nice creatures to have around. Their nests are absolute works of art. As you can see, all these, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's 7 capsules in there, and they say to make 7 or 8 capsules, they actually use half a square meter of leaf, and instead of putting a thick wall of mud at the end, they actually fill up to the first capsule this absolutely it's a bit like a fortress of leaves, as you can see. Now, me being a little bit sad, when I opened this tube up to take the cocoons out to keep them safe, I actually took that apart, and there was 86 leaf segments at the end of that tube. That was quite amazing. The cuckoo bees that will I suppose you could call it parasitized red mason. Leafcutter bees are the Coleopsis bees, the sharp-tailed bees. I hope I've got my ID right on this one. I got it down to Coleopsis inermis. And you can see there why they're called sharp-tailed bees. I don't mind them being about. They're lovely creatures in their own right. They never reach plague proportions. So to use a silly pun, I just leave them be. They're lovely creatures to look at and see. Bee hotels. They've got some good press. They've got some bad press. Some people describe them as bee cemeteries. I hope mine aren't. As I say, I do stuff with my bee hotels that some people think is good, other people think isn't so good. I've been accused of playing God by some people, but here we go. That was one I gave to a friend. I'm not in this to make any money. I just like people to see these bees and learn a little bit about them. And as you can see, that one completely and totally filled up. That is my own design now. I have made all various different sorts of bee hotel, but this is the one I've landed on. Instead of having a big one in the garden now, I've scattered these smaller ones all around. And it does cut down on the parasitization rates, to be quite honest. As you can see, I've tried all different designs. Tubes, these slotted trays. I don't use the slotted trays anymore. They tend to warp and open up, and that lets in various parasites. You can't get rid of parasites altogether, but you can keep them down to controllable numbers. Because if you just leave one of these bee hotels year on year on year, then they are taken over by parasites. My take on that is that, hang on, we've got a cat coming to see us. Go away, Bill. Come on. Oh, see you later, man. Sorry about that. My take is that we attract the bees into our gardens by putting these things up, and they nest in a far higher density than they would in nature. I look upon it personally as the duty of care to look after these bees. We put hedgehog houses in our gardens. We clean out our bird boxes. Honeybee keepers wouldn't leave their hive year on year on year, just taking the honey out, not doing anything for the bees. So I justify it by that. I also justify it by giving these things away to friends, especially families who've got little children. And I believe it does get the kids on side with bees. So, excuse this cat, I'm just getting rid of him again. Come on. Yeah, he's away. Excellent. Where was I? Oh, yeah. It's just a way of getting kids on board with bees, really. As you can see, I've tried all different designs of these things. Most of these now are lying around in my garden shed. Yeah, as you can see, I've gone through quite a few different sorts. The one at the top really was too big. The one at the bottom, I still use that. There's one in next door neighbour's garden, and there's one about 3 doors away down the street where I live. And yeah, they're not too bad. I also use these things called release chambers that I mentioned earlier. Again, my own design, and basically all it is a box. It needn't be that posh, but it's got a slide out drawer. And when I've got the cocoons ready in the spring, pop them into the release chamber and shut the drawer up again. And what that allows for me to do is every now and again, open the drawer and you can actually watch the bees hatching out. There's a little lad who lives next door to us. Last year, he actually had a cocoon in his hand while the male red mason bee came out. It walked along his hand, pooed all over him, and flew off. He thought that was great. That's a male hatching out there, and there's a female. That bee nest today, as I say, it is a little bit too big for the average garden. I could give it a try. It's sitting in the shed at the moment, but as you can see, it's got a built-in release chamber in the middle. I'm trying to find a home for that. Probably pop it up at the Wildlife Trust when I've renovated it for next year. They're the ones I've settled on. I've got in my own garden at the moment, I've got 5 of these scattered round. There's the big tube in the middle with the cardboard tubes in. Should they become full, I don't think it's going to be a particularly great year for red mason bees this year, with it being so cold during April. I can put some extra tubes down the side of the big brown tube in the middle. Then occasionally you get a bumblebee with an identity crisis calling in. Tree bumblebee. I don't know quite what she was doing. I haven't worked that one out yet, but there we are. So when you start opening these tubes up, you find all manner of things. What I like to see is nice, healthy red mason bee cocoons with all the black droppings, or frass as it's known, all around them. Quite clean little creatures, red mason bees. The inside of the cocoon is totally clean of this frass. Don't know quite how they do it, and it's all on the outside. So that's on the left, a nice healthy cocoon. On the right, there's that yellow powder, and then there's that fleshy coloured pile. And what that fleshy coloured pile is osmiae mites, Chytodictalis osmiae, I believe it is. I hope my pronunciation's right. I'm not a scientist. And when you look at these characters under a microscope, just a tiny little drop of them, they look like that. If you zoom in like that, and like that. And what they do, they attach themselves to the bees, and they get distributed all around the neighbourhood. And you end up, if you don't look after your bees, you end up with bees looking like that. And as I said, I made that proud boast at the beginning, saying all of these photographs except that one, and the ones at Highgate were taken in my garden. That one was as well. And that's when I didn't know any better. That's when I just thought these bees will look after themselves. And I think that was 2011 or 2012. And I started seeing a lot of bees like that. Some of them just came staggering out and fell to the ground. They were that infested with these mites, they couldn't fly. And that's why people actually put one of these bee nesters or hotels up, and in about 6 years, there's very, very few bees. And it's mainly because of these little characters, these mites. Another one, as you can see at the top, that's what I love to see when I open the tubes up. I'm not so keen on seeing what's down at the bottom, and that is all down to this little character. The common English name for it is the Houdini Fly, Caxacinus indicator. And what that one does, before the bee has actually closed the cell, it will go in, lay its eggs, and get out again rather quickly. If it just lays a few eggs, 3, 4, 5 eggs, then you end up with a tiny bee. If it lays a lot of eggs like that previous slide, then they're kleptoparasites. They don't directly kill their host, but they eat all the pollen and nectar, and the bee starves to death, or the grub starves to death. And then when you're cleaning these cocoons, which I'll show you again in a moment, they feel quite firm. A nice healthy red mason bee cocoon, it might be a little bit crackly, but they do feel firm. Some are very, very soft and spongy, and they're the ones that have got these little maggots in, which are the larvae of a tiny little wasp called Monodontomerus obscurus, or mono wasp. They always appear, and you always find a few within. So the only other thing really that causes a problem, it's a disease caused by mold. It's a little bit like, oh, what is it called that they get in beehives? Oh, the name escapes me. No, it's gone. It's gone. Foul brood. It came back. It's a fungal disease. As you can see there, red mason bee grub had expired, and all that yellow stuff is pollen. That's possibly due to foraging in damp weather and bringing the mold spores back with the pollen, but I'm not sure about that. I don't find much of it, but occasionally you do. So, bamboo tubes are split open very, very carefully. I mark the end so I know I'm opening them at the right end. Just put a knife in, twist, they come open. These commercially available cardboard tubes, they've got a straw inside. So very carefully pull out the straw, then just nick it with scissors, just where the mud cap is, and then open it up and just keep untwisting it. They come apart quite well, and there you go. And then remove the cocoons, and next thing I do with the cocoons then, once they're out of those, give them a quick brush with an artist brush, and then that's what they look like when you've got the worst of the mud and the frass off them. And then the wife thinks I'm crazy. I don't think she's within earshot. She thinks I'm absolutely mad, but I spend hours and hours every autumn, late autumn and early winter. I actually clean every healthy cocoon that I can find. The ones I'm not sure of, I'll still clean. I'll just store them away in a pot and see what hatches out in the spring. Sometimes it's a bee, sometimes it's something not quite as desirable as a bee. I do realise these creatures have all got their part to play, but I like my bees too much. I said to Leanne yesterday, I almost get emotionally involved with my red mason bees. So they end up looking like that. And then after all that, I have a few for myself and give most of them away. I won't let any of these bees go out of Staffordshire. I think it's wrong. There's some commercial companies which will send them all over the UK. I don't like that. There's a lot of danger attached to that, to my way of thinking anyway. I just keep them mainly within Stafford, actually. There's teachers at the school got some of my bee hotels. We've got bee hotels up in the school grounds, and a lot of friends and neighbours have got them as well. All I do is make myself more work every winter, but I love it. You can sit there and dream of spring when you're doing this job in the cold winter's night. And then they're stored in a fridge, believe it or not. I had to buy this fridge specially to store these creatures. I keep them about, with the trays of water, I check them every week. I keep the humidity at about 90%, temperature between 2 and 5 degrees, and they seem to do quite well with that. As I said, just keep a close eye on them. Occasionally I give them a mist over with an atomizer spray, and then about a week before I want to put them out, they go to ambient temperature in the shed, and then put them out into the release chambers on the bee nesters. And so far, touch wood, they've hatched out very, very nicely every year. They're a little bit late this year. Some are hatching, but some aren't. And now then, I said right at the beginning that the solitary bees collect their pollen either on the scopa on the underside of their abdomen, or the scopa on the tibia of the hind leg. There's some solitary bees that are almost completely hairless. Well, most of them are hairless. This little character is called Haleus hylenatus, the hairy yellow-faced bee. This is the male with the hairy yellow face, and if you look closely just behind the eye, you'll see that little fringe of hairs. I didn't notice these for a while. I bought this plant, popped it in the garden, and it became quite popular with these tiny, tiny little bees. Stephen Falk's book hadn't come out when I first started seeing these, so I hadn't got a clue what they were. I did know they were bees, so it was a bit of an internet search. And there we go. The plant, by the way, is called cinquefoil. Tiny, tiny, or this particular type of cinquefoil, the blooms are about the size of a, I don't know, 2p piece. So that'll give you an idea of how small these bees are. But there's the female. She hasn't got the yellow face. As you can see, totally hairless. So where do they carry their pollen and nectar? There's just a front view of the same creature. As you can see, they're all on this cinquefoil plant. I put one in the back last year in the back garden. These are in the front. And within days of, well, less than days, as soon as it started to bloom, these little bees appeared on it. So I know a lot of bumblebees and other solitary bees, but these seem to, again, if you'll excuse the pun, make a beeline for the cinquefoil. So what do they do? You can actually see them if you watch really, really closely. You can actually see them. They gather the pollen in their mandibles and then they transfer it. They carry it in the crop, and then when they get to wherever they're nesting, they regurgitate it into their little cellophane cocoons and lay an egg into that. They say that the egg almost floats. There's a lot more nectar in the mix than with other solitary bees. That's possibly because it makes it easier to regurgitate if it's more aqueous than a normal pollen load. But there you go. If you look really closely, you can see that bee with pollen in her mouth. I find these quite fascinating. I'm pretty sure this is Helaeus hylenatus. And there you go. You can see the pollen in her jaws there. So just one other little bee to look out for. And there we go. And that gives you an idea of the size of these creatures with the aphid in the background. One of the creatures that will attack a Helaeus bee are these solitary wasps, Gasteruptian wasps. And again, it's just one of these little things that you find if you look closely. It makes nature such a wonderful thing to be involved with. We had one of these on the school nester at school last year. There was, I don't know, out of 100 kids that saw it, there was 20 that were fascinated and 80 that were terrified until I put it on my finger and showed it to them. And yeah, I enjoy working with the kids at the school, shall we say. But there we are. And I've got through that a little bit quicker than I thought. And that's about it as far as the presentation goes. Happy to answer any questions anyone may have if I'm capable. And I really, really hope that you enjoyed that little look at solitary bees in gardens. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ron. That was really fascinating, and just really your passion really shines through, and it was really interesting just to hear your the amount of time you put in and how you really care for these things. And you must have you've clearly learned an enormous amount just from experiences in your garden with a huge variety of species, and yeah, very sort of advanced bee hotels from what I've seen anyway, so which I'm sure will sort of inspire others to think about what they might be able to do. So yeah, thank you very much for doing that this evening for us.
Pleasure.
Right, we'll go to questions then. I think the first question that was coming through was about cameras, which is a sort of a common theme of these webinars, actually. So and there seems to have been some responses around that already. So Mike K was asking, I am looking for a camera to take photos of wasps. What type of camera do you use for your photos?
What type of camera? Basically, it's just a little Canon compact, believe it or not, put to macro setting. I've tried using SLRs, but I'm no photographer. I don't know what an F number is or anything, so I just use a little compact. It's a lot easier to carry around, and you don't have to worry about clouting the lens on your garden fence or anything like that. So honestly, the vast majority of those photographs in that presentation were taken on a little compact. That answers the question.
Thanks. Well, that's all I use. I'm pretty basic with it. But yeah, and I think someone was just advising on a macro lens to Mike there in the chat already. So yeah, so that's great. Okay, so Mike Ashworth is asking, is it better to site the nesters in a sunny situation, or will shade also work?
Very much best in the sun, if possible, between 1 and 2 meters off the ground and facing due south. And then when we get a sunny day, they're in sun nearly all the while. The longer they're in the sun, the better. Definitely facing south in the sun, about eye level, or if you've got children looking at it, go down to about a meter. Don't go much lower than a meter, otherwise when it rains heavily you get all the spatter coming back up onto your bee house. So yeah, between 1 meter and 2 meters, I say. And
okay, brilliant.
Facing south if possible. In shade it's not particularly good. If you can't face one south, then face it west if possible, but always where there's no dappled shade. They don't take very well to dappled shade.
Okay, so if you're sort of stuck with a north-facing garden or something, is it even worth trying to put these nesters out, or?
Depends on the amount of shading. Our garden faces sort of northwest, so I just find the sunniest little spots and put my bee nesters there. We get the morning sun in the front garden, sort of from in the middle of summer, from about, I would say, 6:30 right through in the back garden, we get the sun. It's not ideal, but it does work. I have tried putting one down the bottom in the we've got some big trees down the bottom of our garden. Nothing at all actually used that bee nester. Yeah. But
okay.
The ones that did get some sun, they got used quite heavily. Best if you can face them south if possible. Failing that, you could even face them east to get the morning sun. West, I've just said west, but thinking about it, west isn't a good position. Most of our prevailing weather comes from the west, so they're going to get wet.
Okay, thanks. Well, Mike, I hope you've got some sort of south-facing situation in your garden. Okay, on to a question from David. How often and in what way do you clean out the hotels to avoid parasite infestation? I think you went into that quite in detail, didn't you, Ron?
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps following the question.
About October, I'll get the nesters out the garden. Quite often, if they get full, then I'll take full tubes out early and replace them with empty ones and just store them, not in a garden shed because it gets too hot. I'll put them, we've got an outhouse, it's nice and cool. I'll store them in there, put new tubes in. But anyway, coming up to October, the bee nesters come into the shed. All the tubes come out. I open them then, clean them, and it takes me, I don't know, takes me up some years till December to get all the cocoons out and cleaned, and then they go in the fridge. And about 2 weeks before they go into the release chambers, they no need to put them in the fridge. What I'm going to try next year is a 50-50 mix of cocoons in the fridge, cocoons in a cool place, and just check the sort of hatch, the dates of the hatch, see if it makes any difference. That you know, I was advised to put them in the fridge many years ago. I've done it and it's worked, but I want to keep it a little bit more natural next year. I'm going to try 50% of the cocoons I keep anyway out in a cool place. Again, not in a shed. They get too hot even in the winter if we have a sunny day. So yeah. So it's just a matter of taking the cocoons out, give them a dust off with an artist brush. And then what I do anyway is get some of these cotton wool things and just wash every cocoon off, let it dry, and then pop it in the fridge. Got a cheap humidifier or humidity gauge, and just keep an eye on that. Keep it between minimum of 85 with trays of water, and occasionally, about once a month, just give them a very, very light spray over with an atomizer to stop them from dehydrating. And then 2 weeks before I want to put the bees out, then bring them into ambient temperature. That's how I do it. I'm not saying that's 100% right. That's how I do it, and it's worked every year so far.
And do you find that your the bees from your cocoons in the fridge, are they coming out at the same time as those, you know, wild in your garden?
A few days later. I do see bees, you know, sort of proper wild red mason bees, if you like, around. Normally just a few days before mine start to hatch out. But it's only days normally. But it is a very strange year this year, with it being so cold at night.
Okay, thanks. Do you have any problems with mold in the fridge?
Occasionally you can find, but all I do then is just get the cocoons out and basically just wipe the mold off. You know, those cocoons are so immensely tough. It'd have to be something really, really powerful to get through and damage the bee.
Okay.
I just give them a wipe off. If that happens, I've only known it happen once.
So your mortality is really quite low then?
Yeah. Every year when they've all hatched, I empty all the release chambers. I normally achieve between 95 and 98% hatch rates, so it's not too bad.
that sounds very high to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Sorry, I'm getting too interested in hogging all the questions here. I'll go to this question from Marlene Kramer. How can you take good care of your bees if you don't have a special fridge for storing cocoons? Would a shed in the garden be too cold? And I think you just said it might be too hot, actually.
Yeah. It's even in the winter, a wooden shed can get very, very warm inside, and they get really cold at night. If you've got a brick outhouse or a garage, pop them in there. They don't have to go in a fridge, but it's just the way I do it. I think it was 3 years ago I had that many cocoons that I had to buy a little miniature fridge to store the cocoons in, rather than I shouldn't really be saying this on air, but we used to keep them in the fridge in the kitchen. But there was that many of them one year I had to go out and buy a special fridge for the Mason bee cocoons. But yeah, so that is maybe an indicator of a bit of success by having that many. There was about 4,000 cocoons that year that I cleaned. But as I said, the wife thinks I'm crazy, but there we go.
Okay, and if, let's say, you don't have a special fridge, and maybe you don't even have a garage or an outbuilding, is there any other sort of alternative?
Yeah, poor option is go back to the shed. Yeah, but yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but they can, sheds even in winter can get quite warm if the sun shines on them all day. But
Okay.
yeah, it should still be okay. Yeah, yeah.
So paint your shed white, Marlene. You might
Yeah,
keep it
yeah,
a bit cooler.
yeah.
Yeah, that's all I've got is a shed, and yeah, I have tried with a moth pupa I was looking after for my colleague, and it came out early, a few weeks early. So especially with the warmth we had in April in the shed, it was getting a bit warm. So, but you know, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my head around a scientific paper from Czechoslovakia where they say that if these bees kept in a fridge, actually, while they're in torpor, as it were, they don't use as much energy as a bee that's where the temperatures go fluctuating up and down. And they've actually weighed these bees. I don't fully understand it yet, but they've weighed the bees, and the bees that have hatched naturally are lighter than the bees that have been kept in a constant temperature in a fridge, which is quite interesting. Yeah.
Okay, great. How about I'll open a. Would anyone like to ask a speaker question to Ron? Yeah, Elaine, would you like to unmute yourself?
Okay, thank you. I've got my solitary bees in logs where we've drilled holes, and just now you were saying that over a few years they would become parasitized. My question is, when can you get rid of the logs safely and replace you? I mean, I can always add new ones or put new ones around the garden, but the old ones have always, they're either, you know, some hatching and some nesting, and I don't want to kill anything.
Yeah, just try, if you want to go down that road, just try putting new logs up, and you may well find that the bees, if they nest in the same sort of cavity from one year to another, then they have to indulge time and effort. They will clean all the debris out.
Okay.
So try putting some new logs up, and
Right.
you'll probably find that the majority of your bees will then go into the new ones.
Oh, brilliant.
If you're prepared to do that every year. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, a question from Will Nash. Have you had any success in rearing megachile or Hylaeus? And I always say that wrong. And have you had any success with rearing those two genera, Ron?
The Hylaeus are basically that I have opened one, and the cocoons are that fragile. They're just like cellophane. I don't think there's much you could do with them but leave them to their own devices, to be quite honest. The only way I've done anything at all with leaf cutters, the megachile bees, is just to open the tubes up, take the cocoons out, and put them into a release chamber, into a drawer. Any that haven't hatched, I've opened up, took the leaves off, and again, their cocoons are very, very fragile. They're strange. They actually incorporate their droppings into their cocoons. They're really, really. I don't know how you could do anything with them. As I keep saying, I'm no scientist, but I've got a feeling that actually these leaves may have some sort of antiseptic or disinfectant value. I've never actually seen any mites or anything on any leafcutter bee cocoon. So I don't really do a lot with leafcutters, and the Hylaeus, they're just tiny, you know, great clumsy oaf like me. I'd squash them. No, the Hylaeus just seem to look after themselves. It's it's the osmia that seem to get attacked by actual parasites and kleptoparasites.
Okay, that sounds like very sensible advice there. So Will Nash was also very interested to hear that you have observed less parasitization in these genuses. Can you say any more on this?
Not really. It's just an observation. As I say, red mason bees seem to cop for a lot. There's obviously I am pronouncing this, that is the Coleoxys bees, which will have a go at leaf cutters. They are actually the cuckoo bee of leaf cutters, aren't they? The 6 Coleoxys bees. But no, I don't know. I don't know any more than that, really.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's a very interesting observation, though. Okay, on to a question from Dominic Noah. Many of my mason bee cocoons just haven't emerged yet this year, mostly the females. A large amount of males came out earlier in the spring when there was a warm spell. Do you think the females will come out if we get some better weather?
Yes, they will. I've read an article in not an article, a piece in a book. I can't remember the book now, sadly, but a gentleman there, going back a few years, we had the same sort of weather. The males hatched out early April, and there was actually a month gap before the females emerged. So yeah, I'm still pretty confident. I've seen about 2 females in my garden, and we're into May. I'm looking back on my photographic records, I've got about 10, 15 filled up tubes this time last year. But yeah, and what the bees will do if it stays cold, they'll the females will stay in those cocoons until it's right. The temperatures are due to rise next week, so you know your female bees will hatch as soon as the weather warms for a couple of days. Yeah.
Okay, so there's some reassurance for you, that, Dominic. And James Gilbert in the chat is just saying ours are emerging in Leeds and Hull now. And I know, Dominic, you're from the northwest, so perhaps that should be on a similar line with Leeds and Hull. So keep an eye out.
Yeah.
And hopefully next week with the increasing temperatures. So how long can the males wait though? If you said a month.
Yeah,
that sounds that's quite a long time for a male bee, I imagine.
Yeah, if it's cold, they'll just sit in the tubes within these bee houses. They'll take the odd trip out. I grow a lot of this particular type of crane's bill. I'm not sure of the name of the. It's a cultivar one. It's not not a wild crane's bill, but they're in bud. But normally they'd be out 3 weeks ago, and that is one of the favourite forages. The forget-me-nots are out. The males that I've got out, you can see them knocking around nectar in on the forget-me-nots. But yeah, I think they'll last long enough to wait for the females. Yeah, because there's none of this riotous behaviour going on. So that they're not using much energy, and yeah, I think we'll be. I don't think it's going to be a brilliant year, but I think we'll be okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Another question from Marlene Kramer. How do you rate the chances of attracting solitary bees to your garden by providing nesting space and planting flowers? I live in Edinburgh and I haven't seen many yet. Some bumblebees only.
You need for mason bees, you need 3 things: somewhere for them to nest, something for them to feed on, and a supply of mud. If you don't provide one of those 3 things, then you're not going to get any bees nesting with you. Obviously, if you haven't got a bee house, then you're not, unless they just nest in some plant stems around the garden. But the most important for red mason bees, well, they're all important, but this thing about the supply of mud. Where I live, we're really, really lucky because about 20 yards from the end of our garden, there's a little stream. And you can watch these bees. They'll come out of the houses and they'll head straight down to where the stream is. That's where they get their mud from. So you've got to have the 3 things. otherwise, if you haven't got mud, then basically the bees, if you've got cocoons and you've got no mud, if you bought cocoons commercially or something like that, then the bees will hatch out and clear off, basically. You've got to have those three things in place.
Okay, and if you don't have a stream or a any riparian habitat nearby, if you a bit of bare ground in your garden,
Pond,
okay.
you could try a tub and just keep the soil moist. I've known them to use that. There's a company in America called Crown Bees who've actually formulated the perfect mud mix for red mason bee, or blue orchard bees, their equivalent over there. They say it works for red mason bees over here. If you want to actually try buying some of this mud, then have a look at Nurturing Nature's website. A guy called George Pilkington. I think he's had some dealings with Crown Bees. He may supply the mud as well, but it's worth just having a go with, buy a bag of pesticide-free topsoil and try just keeping that moist in a bowl. And I have known the bees use that as well in other circumstances. As I say, I'm dead lucky we've got this little stream just down the way, and that's where my bees get their mud from. I'm 100% sure of that.
Okay, thanks, Ron. So yeah, there's potentially different options. Yeah. Okay, question from Chloe Aldridge. What is the optimal depth for the tubes in a bee nester?
Brilliant question. Yeah, you can go into a garden centre or even supermarkets now, and you can buy these bee houses that are basically about 3 inches wide. What total waste of time. Minimum 160 millimeters. You can go up to 200 millimeters. The commercially available tubes that I use, and I cut my bamboo to the same, about 160 mil. All the books you read will say 8 millimeters for red mason bees and 10 and 11 millimeter diameter holes for leafcutter bees. Helios bees will get into about 3 or 4 millimeter holes, and you don't have to go particularly deep with them because the cocoons are that small. They can get a good row in. Now, what the books say, as I've just said, is 10 or 11 millimeter holes for leafcutter bees, and I followed that religiously a few years ago. I made a special bee house, drilled all these canes out 10, 11, 12 millimeters, put it up, thought the red mason bees won't use that, those holes are too big, and within about a month it was full of red mason bee nests. So the bees don't read the books, but that's what the books say. Yeah. So it was just totally full. These bees must have had muscles like Popeye by the time they'd finished filling those tubes up, but I didn't want to stop them. Yeah, that's what they say. About 150 mil minimum. The ones you can buy, there's a couple of companies that supply them. Just have a look on the internet. I don't know if I can advertise companies on here, but yeah, they're about 160 millimeters long. The leafcutter bees actually tend to prefer using the certain company used to provide 10 millimeter tubes. Leafcutter bees would use them, but they seem to prefer, for some reason, I haven't quite worked out, they seem to prefer drilled out bamboo. Yeah, that's leafcutter bees. Red mason bees will nest in anything you provide for them, but leafcutter bees seem to like the bamboo.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just go straight to a very recent question in the chat because it's just related to this sort of question. So Mark Sheridan's just saying, I have a couple of Nurturing Nature, that's a company, isn't it? A couple of Nurturing Nature observation boxes, which are always well used. Have you used them?
Yeah, I know George, who provides them quite well. Yeah. But I prefer to use tubes rather than slots in wood. I've got nothing against George's boxes, but I'm a bit of an independent character, and I'd rather build my own stuff and experiment. for myself than just go out and buy one. Having said that, nothing at all wrong with George Pilkington's stuff at all. No, if I wasn't a little bit, how shall we put it, like to do things myself so much, yeah, I'd go and buy one of George's probably. Yeah, definitely. Nothing wrong with them whatsoever.
Okay, and from
I can answer that one.
And from an impartiality point of view, there are other providers of observation boxes as well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Around. Yeah. There you go. Okay.
Can I just interrupt a moment? I said that when I was on about how long the tubes need to be, you can buy them with canes in about that big, about 3 inches long. All that happens then is these bees are actually programmed to lay unfertilized eggs at the end of these tubes, and you just end up with a load of male bees if you buy these silly things that fall apart after about a year anyway in a lot of cases. Always best to build your own or buy from a reputable person like George Pilkington. That's what I'd say anyway. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Okay, question from Sitka Tepe. Which type of wood can we use to make holes for bee homes, and how big should the holes be? I think you've just answered that, the second part of that. But what type of wood do you use apart from bamboo, Ron?
I just use bamboo or cardboard tubes. Yeah, that's all
Okay.
I use. Another problem with using logs, if they haven't been seasoned and you start drilling holes into this timber, then they start to crack from where you've drilled the hole, and that will let in these mono wasps and the flies as well. It depends. There's a wonderful little piece. I'm sure a lot of people who are here tonight have heard of Dave Golson. Now he's just written a book called Gardening for Bumblebees, and he's also got a very, very good little piece right at the end about bee hotels and what he thinks. George Pilkington basically does with his cocoons what I do with mine, and Dave Golson has described, he says, one of his books, he says, sorry, George, I think what you do is a little indulgent, which, Dave has written a good piece. He just drills holes in wood, and he finishes off saying, I'm sure he says, I know there's bees in my garden. I know there's parasites in my garden, and there's probably bee disease in my garden, but after all, isn't that how it should be? I can see where he's coming from. But as I said right at the start, I'm almost emotionally attached to the Mason bees every year, and I just feel I have to look after him as I do. I don't think Dave Golson's got anything against that. And he does admit that there's further research is actually needed into the use of bee hotels. So there was a big experiment done in Canada about 5 years ago, organisation called PLOS, and they basically, I think it was Toronto, they divided the city in half. They put 400 in the east side, the west side of the city, 400 of these bee houses in the east side, managed the ones in the west and ignored the ones in the east, and they actually found a reduction in the solitary bee population where there was all these unmanaged bee nesters, believe it or not. So they're not the be all and end all of bee conservation, bee hotels, no way. I think you've got to look after them.
I think I remember someone who'd had bee hotels for a very long time. I think maybe a couple of decades, and they had said that the parasitoids do go down in a cycle after many years, and then the bees come back.
It's a roller coaster.
There is a very long-term cycle with these things, and
But as I said right at the beginning, I like to get as many of these cocoons as I can, and then introduce one or two other people every year to the pleasures of red mason bees. And if I just had a load of parasitized bee hotels, I couldn't do that.
You wouldn't be able
That's how
to
I
do that.
it. Yeah.
So there's different ways to manage it and approach it, and it depends. I know my colleague who is very much into ichneumonids would probably never would probably just completely leave it unmanaged. So and
you know, we always take, we've got one at the school, and it's always year 4, and in the autumn we'll take these things in, we'll get all the cocoons out so the kids can see what's happening, and then the following year they've obviously moved on to year 5, so the next year 4 is doing it. It ties in nicely with the little bit about life cycles in the curriculum. Saves the school buying all these butterfly houses. So every year we do that with the year 4 kids. So,
well, that sounds wonderful, Ron, and I wish my children were going to the school that you were caretaker.
All I am is the caretaker. You know, I just get roped in for loads and loads of stuff like that. Yeah, I love it.
No, with that, I think that's a very good way of learning.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Okay, I'll move on to a question now then from Jasper Lepima, and I'm sorry for any pronunciation inaccuracies there, Jasper.
I wouldn't worry, Gary, with a lot of my pronunciation tonight. You've done very well.
Oh, you haven't seen some of the other webinars, probably, Ron. So, okay, how do cavity bees deal naturally with parasites in any nesting sites? Do they regularly change nesting locations to prevent parasite buildup?
Yeah, I would say they do. A lot of red mason bees, anyway, one of their natural nesting sites is an old plant stem. Obviously, that won't stay there forever. What we're doing, as I've said, by putting these bee nesters, bee hotels, bee houses, call them what you wish, in a garden, you're attracting these bees. You know, it's easy nesting for them. So you're attracting these bees, and you're getting them at a far higher density in a small space than you would anywhere in nature. So consequently, the parasite numbers build up quicker. In nature, probably to find a suitable nesting space, one female red mason bee, she'd have to go all over the place, you know, plant stem here, beetle boring in a piece of dead wood there. I've heard of them nesting in motorbike handlebars where the motorbike's been in a garage. But I think the parasitization rate is higher in a bee nest or a bee hotel than it would be out in the wild. But having said that, of course, there is a population of mites in the wild. There's got to be, otherwise they wouldn't appear in bee hotels. They just appear in bee hotels in far, far greater numbers because it's easy for the bees to nest there, and it's easy for the parasites to move around there as well.
Right, brilliant. I think my favourite sort of parasites, I suppose, are oil beetles, but I doubt you'd sort of. It was not going to really work in obviously with bee hotels because they go on the ground nesting solitary bees. Anyway, a question from Christine Potchin. Do you make or buy your tubes? And I think you make them, don't you? But you.
I do buy them, yeah. The cardboard ones.
Okay.
The bamboo. I just buy bamboo, and I buy it when I use. But the years I use bamboo, I buy it in the year previous. Let it all dry. Then I cut it to 150, 160 mil, and then very, very carefully just put a drill through it to 10 mil or 8 mil for red mason bees. But I am tending to go for the commercially available cardboard tubes now.
Okay.
There's less waste. You know, basically you can only use a bamboo tube once. What I have tried doing, you can get these cardboard tubes with a paper straw inside. That's the one I was unwrapping when I was showing you how I look after the cocoons. And I've tried drilling bamboo out to 8 millimeters and pushing one of those straws in, but I've never had a bee use that combination for some reason. They've nested in bamboo all the way around, but they've never gone in bamboo with a paper liner. I don't know why. Yeah. But,
okay, and when you have been buying bamboo, how do you sort of buy bamboo? Does it come in certain diameters? I know obviously there's a lot of different bamboo species, and my unfortunately I was brought up with it because my dad was a member of the Bamboo Society, and we used to have bamboos as big as the house, and obviously many of the canes are far too wide for any bees. But do you have to go for specific sizes on those?
It's just a matter of looking. You know, I normally go for 6 or 8 foot long ones, and then you can get a certain amount of good tubes out of the end. The rest we use around the garden when I use bamboo. I'm trying to cut down on the use of bamboo. It's more environmentally friendly to throw a little piece of paper into the recycle bin than it is to throw 2 pieces of bamboo. So I'm moving away from the bamboo sort of side of things. I'll still use it a little bit for the leafcutter bees, or there's a company that sells cardboard tubes with a cardboard liner. And if you take the liner out, then that leaves you with a 10 mil tube, which leaf cutters will then use as well. So, and then, just look up, just anyone, you know, obviously I can't mention company names, or I don't think I can. Just look up red mason bee tubes, and you'll get 2 companies come up, both based in Shrewsbury, the 2 that I use. So that gives you a clue.
Okay. All right, thanks, Ron. I wonder if anyone would like to ask us a question. Again, anyone like to speak a question before I go to the next one in the chat? Anyone like an opportunity to use your voice? No, okay. Okay, so another question then from Dominic Noah. I noticed a lot of small beetles in one of my red mason bee boxes last season. Did you mention a beetle pest in your presentation? I think they had some red coloration to them. Quite a nice looking beetle, maybe 2 mil in length.
Yes, I can't remember the name of these beetles. I've never seen them in my nest, but there is a beetle that can make a bit of a nuisance. It's in a mason bee house. Yeah. Earwigs as well can sometimes cause a little bit of a problem, as can ants. But I can't remember the name of the beetle now because I've never been troubled by one.
Well, if you do remember later on, Ron, maybe we can pass that on to Dominic. Maybe send him an email.
There's Patinus or something along those lines. But once I will find out. I'll jog my memory. I'll ping Leanna an email, and then the answer can be passed on. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Right then. I don't think I can see any more questions in the chat. You know, they're just lots of thank yous for you there, Ron.
Right. Thank you, everybody, for listening and putting up with me.
Ideas.